They didn't ask for permission, they didn't use soldiers, they used gold. Under the polished name, Gold for Vote, a global program was set into motion. African nations rich in gold would receive democracy support training, media funding, and election observers, but only if they agreed to export their gold at pre-approved rates, well below market value. Burkina Faso was told, "Sign it, and the world will call you democratic. Refuse, and you'll be isolated." The deal was clear: vote how we want, price what we say. But Traoré said no, and the backlash was immediate, headlines painting him as a strongman. Sanctions, whispered through diplomatic back channels. Mining companies ordered to freeze future contracts. Then came the documents, internal memos, charts, briefs, leaked to international media. The plan had a name, a budget, and a target list. At the top, Burkina Faso. The phrase, on every cover page, stability through suppressed assets. This wasn't about gold markets. It was about who controls value and who gets to decide the worth of a nation. And this time, Africa refused to be appraised. The leak did not come from a whistleblower. It came from a fracture inside the machine itself. On a quiet Tuesday morning, a folder marked G4V, Strategic Rollout. Phase 2 landed in the inbox of La République Internationale, an independent news outlet in Geneva. No sender, no IP trace, just data raw, damning, surgical, inside, 73 pages of internal U.S. Treasury drafts, State Department talking points, and memos between Washington and 3 major gold-backed investment firms. One memo, September 23rd, read, "Sub-Saharan compliance is contingent on value stabilization through controlled export agreements. Offer media assistance and democratic framing as incentive. Resistance must be reframed as authoritarian isolationism." The language was clinical, the strategy decades in the making. Gold for Vote was more than a diplomatic initiative. It was a mechanism. Here's how it worked. Nations like Burkina Faso, Ghana, and Mali were offered favorable international ratings, donor access, and election legitimacy. If they agreed to export gold under stabilization pricing, that price, however, was not set by market demand, but by the U.S. Federal Reserve, in consultation with strategic partners. Burkina Faso, with one of the fastest-growing gold outputs in the Sahel, became the hinge point. Its refusal posed a threat, not economic, but symbolic. If one nation defied the pricing model and still thrived, others would follow. One chart titled "Disruption Forecast," host refusal scenarios, laid it bare. It listed escalate IMF, Audi Préchou, discredit leadership through electoral narrative, restrict export routes via partner states, delay financial clearances for mining equipment imports. This wasn't policy, it was punishment. The final section of the leak contained a PowerPoint deck from a Washington consultancy group, Africa's Value, Managing Perception for Strategic Compliance. Slide 14 asked a chilling question: can perceived instability outweigh material gain? It wasn't just about taking the gold, it was about taking the right to define its worth. When the documents went public, Traoré didn't issue a press release. He held a televised address and spoke plainly. They priced our minerals. Then they priced our votes. Now they try to price our dignity. The fallout would ripple through every vault in the Sahel. The global response was immediate and sharply divided. In Washington, officials dismissed the leak as fabricated foreign disinformation, though none could deny the documents bore authentic metadata. In Brussels, diplomats refused comment, but quietly postponed an economic summit with West African leaders. The IMF issued a vague statement about market stability mechanisms, while gold futures markets jolted with volatility. But in Ouagadougou, the reaction was neither silence nor retreat. Burkina Faso's Ministry of Mines published a white paper within 48 hours titled "Monetary Autonomy Through Mineral Sovereignty." The opening line read, "A nation that does not set the price of its wealth does not own it." The paper outlined the core deception behind gold for vote, the idea that democracy could be traded like a commodity, with electoral narrative as the wrapper and mineral suppression as the cost. In response, RUS Alliance des États du Sahel held a special session in Bamako. Representatives from Mali, Niger, Guinea, and Chad joined Burkina Faso in drafting what would be called the Bamako Declaration, a resolution condemning the external manipulation of resource valuation for political leverage. Meanwhile, the public narrative began to shift. Clarence Dupree, the former U.S. advisor who had defected with key documents, appeared in a surprise interview with Al Jazeera. "I worked on this program. I was in the rooms. It wasn't about economic policy, it was about breaking resistance. Softly, if you can't bomb them, bankrupt them. And if you can't bankrupt them, buy their vote with their own gold." His words went viral. Within 24 hours, the hashtag #ValueEyesOurs surged across West African platforms. Graffiti appeared in Niamey and Bobo Dioulasso. "Not for sale. They print dollars. We bleed gold." Then came the blowback. Western NGOs announced suspension of election partnership programs in Burkina Faso. Mining tech shipments were held at ports in Togo and Côte d'Ivoire. Credit agencies downgraded the country's risk rating overnight. But something unexpected followed. Rather than spiral, Burkina Faso's local economy adapted. Community exchanges using gold-backed local currency surged. Artisanal mining cooperatives reported record participation. And for the first time in decades, a new narrative took root. "We don't just own the gold, we own its meaning." The message was spreading, and the global market was no longer the only one assigning value. They tried to shut him out, so he opened the door wider. In the wake of the leaked documents and the seismic revelations of gold for vote, President Ibrahim Traoré did not hunker down, he doubled down. From the capital of Ouagadougou, a plan was unveiled, bold, technical, irreversible: the creation of the Ajax African Gold Exchange, a pan-African trading platform based not in New York or London, but in Niamey, Niger, right in the heart of the Sahel. Its mission: decouple African gold pricing from the London fix, create a sovereign benchmark based on production cost, regional demand, and internal value, ban export of raw gold without refinement and parliamentary transparency. The announcement shook every boardroom from Zurich to Houston. At the press launch, Traoré stood before a wall of gold bars, not in vaults, but reclaimed from artisanal miners across Burkina Faso. "This is not just metal," he declared. "This is memory. This is blood. This is power, unpriced." Until now, the West responded swiftly. Sanctions were proposed in the U.S. Senate. The European Central Bank warned of instability in bullion markets. Major multinationals announced exits due to deteriorating investment climate, but the message had already landed. AES nation began drafting similar legislation. Guinea offered to host Ajax's refining infrastructure. Mali deployed security units to protect cross-border gold routes from sabotage. And for the first time in decades, African media stopped quoting London and started quoting Niamey for the daily price of gold. Then came the psychological turning point, the Black Standard. A group of African economists proposed that Afro money, the long-discussed unified regional currency, be backed not by fiat, but by physical gold stored within Africa, not in the Swiss Alps, not under U.S. vaults, but in Tombouctou, in Bamako, in Ouagadougou. This terrified Washington more than any speech, because it meant value was being redefined, not only in economics, but in sovereignty. Meanwhile, Dupree resurfaced again, this time in a congressional hearing via satellite. Protected by whistleblower rights, his closing words to the American public were, "Gold for vote wasn't just a strategy. It was a mirror. It showed us who we are when we think no one is watching." But someone had watched, and someone, Traoré, had responded. What began as political defiance soon evolved into continental momentum. Within weeks of Ajex's launch, the ripple effects of Burkina Faso's rebellion stretched across the African continent and beyond. In Nairobi, student unions held teach-ins titled Decolonizing Value. In Pretoria, financial analysts debated the viability of regional gold-backed clearing systems, and in Lagos, Nollywood directors began scripting dramas inspired by the real-life showdown over sovereignty and bullion. Washington scrambled to contain the ideological contagion. A memo from the National Security Council, leaked by an anonymous staffer, warned, Ajex poses a greater long-term threat to U.S. monetary hegemony than BRICS de-dollarization efforts. The memo wasn't wrong, because Ajex wasn't just economics, it was cultural. Symbolic. It told Africans, you don't have to sell your worth through someone else's window. But with momentum came risk. A series of cyber attacks hit Ajex's website, traced to European IPs. An explosion at a small refinery in southern Mali raised suspicions of sabotage, and anonymous telegram channels began circulating rumors of gold theft cartels linked to AES officials. Traoré stayed calm and countered every move with precision. In a landmark summit, he convened heads of state, engineers, bankers, and elders, yes, and griots and spiritual leaders, to forge a binding charter, the Treaty of Weight and Word. It declared gold reserves in AES states are a matter of spiritual heritage, not just economic strategy. Pricing mechanisms must reflect ancestral ownership, not merely extraction cost. Attempts to externally manipulate African gold will be treated as acts of aggression. The treaty was signed under full moonlight in the desert of Gao, broadcast live across the continent. At the signing, Traoré whispered just 3 words before cameras faded: value fights back. Meanwhile, in the United States, backlash brewed not only in boardrooms but on campaign trails. Donald Trump, seeking to regain his political footing and tap into anti-globalist sentiment, addressed the gold for vote scandal at a rally in Texas. Why are we sending money to Africa for elections and getting nothing back? Their gold, it's not even priced here anymore. That's what happens when you let weak people run the country. His words electrified his base, but also confirmed everything Traoré had warned about. Africa was no longer a mine. It was now a mirror, and the reflection wasn't flattering to the West. And Ajex, it kept running quiet. Decentralized and unbending, the world's most valuable resource was no longer oil, data, or lithium. It was trust in value, and Africa was rewriting what value meant. As Ajex matured into a functioning exchange, new partnerships emerged beyond expected borders. Venezuela began routing its gold transactions through Ajex instead of traditional Swiss channels. Iran proposed a bullion for barter mechanism, offering advanced medical equipment in exchange for refined African gold priced by African standards. But the most shocking came from India. In a discreet bilateral summit, New Delhi sent a delegation to Ouagadougou, proposing joint reserve diversification. The offer, partial backing of the rupee with gold stored in Africa, not London, in return for long-term infrastructure, investments across the Sahel. It was a tectonic shift. India, a former British colony, now seeking value sovereignty through alignment with post-colonial Africa. In response, the Bank of England froze the last batch of Burkina Faso's gold stored in its vaults. Pending documentation review, Traoré didn't flinch. He simply replied, "If our gold is not free in your vaults, then your currency is not free in our mines." The retaliation was subtler this time. Global consulting firms began publishing articles questioning the transparency of Ajex. Financial influencers flooded social media with doomsday predictions about currency tribalism. The New York Times ran a Sunday front page with the headline, "Is Africa's Gold Gambit Doomed?" But the people on the ground told a different story. In rural Senegal, a woman named Aminata opened the first village-run gold cooperative selling traceable grams via Ajex's mobile app. In the markets of N'Djamena, prices began stabilizing in gold grams, rather than volatile CFA francs. And in the universities of Kigali, students held forums titled Reclaiming Wealth, From Minerals to Meaning. The West had called this rebellion, Africa called it revision. Meanwhile, Traoré unveiled the second phase, the Vaults Initiative, underground bunkers across AES nations built to hold physical gold independently of Western banking systems. Each vault would be governed by a 5-person council, 2 state officials, 1 elder, 1 citizen, and 1 external African economist, rotating every year. The message was clear: this was not nationalism. This was continental stewardship, and with every new shipment stored, every gram traded outside London, Africa was sending a signal: we are not just resource-rich, we are value-made. But power never relinquishes easily, and neither does narrative. As Ajax continued to gain traction, a quiet panic began rippling through the financial corridors of Washington, Paris, and Brussels. It wasn't the threat of lost gold that terrified them. It was the threat of lost control over valuation, perception, and precedent. Because if Africa could set its own gold price, what else could it redefine? The U.S. Department of State assembled a shadow task force, Goodnam Project Ledger. Its objective: track all Ajax-aligned trades, disrupt alternate payment routes, and if needed, undermine credibility through strategic information campaigns. Part of this strategy included resurrecting old playbooks. A former AES official was paraded on Western media, claiming internal corruption within Ajax, only to be exposed days later as a paid consultant. A report alleging gold laundering in Ajax cooperatives circulated in policy circles, traced back to a think tank funded by a major London bullion bank. Fake screenshots of Ajax crash warnings spread on Twitter, flagged and removed, but not before shaking market confidence. Traoré remained unshaken. In a joint broadcast with leaders from Mali and Guinea, he addressed the disinformation directly. They weaponized our resources, then our elections. Now they weaponize doubt, but truth, like gold, survives. Fire. The momentum turned again. South American nations began exploratory talks with Ajax, while Russia proposed technical integration with its digital ruble infrastructure. Even a faction within the European Parliament questioned whether the West had overreached in punishing African financial self-determination. Then, one final act of defiance reshaped the landscape. Burkina Faso unveiled Project Echo, a blockchain-based verification ledger recording every gram of gold traded on Ajax, linked to video documentation from mining site to vault, transparent, immutable, publicly accessible. It was no longer just about price, it was about proof, and it was unstoppable. In the words of economist Ifeoma Balewa, what Ajax proves is this: when people reclaim the story behind their wealth, they also reclaim the future it funds. Across the continent, this wasn't seen as economics. It was seen as justice delayed, finally delivered. And in the halls of Ajax's Niamey headquarters, a single phrase was engraved above the vault door: you cannot devalue what you do not define. Africa had just defined itself. At sunrise, they gathered not in parliament, not in war rooms, but beneath the open skies of Ouagadougou. Children, elders, miners, boots. No one had summoned them. No speech had been advertised. And yet they came, instinctively, as if the earth itself had whispered, "Today, we reclaim what was always ours." From battered phones, they streamed the Ajax price ticker. From tin radios, they heard villages quoted on global finance reports, and from every street wall, one message echoed, scrawled, printed, painted: but price our worth. What Traoré and the AES had sparked was not a market rebellion, it was a cultural detonation. Across Africa, the gold in the ground no longer felt cursed or stolen, it felt named, and names have power. In Kenya, a child born that year was named Thamani Swahili for value. In Cameroon, churches held blessings, not for riches, but for the right to define them. In Burkina Faso, elders began teaching a new proverb: A coin can be melted, but its story must remain. The West still called it instability. But inside Africa, something sacred had stabilized, the soul of ownership. And then came the letters, tens of thousands of them, digital, handwritten, folded in cocoa sacks and sent across borders, letters from South America, South Asia, First Nations, Maori communities, all saying the same thing. You made us see it. You made us believe it. Belief is contagious. Inspired by Ajax, Peru announced a pilot community gold ledger. Bolivia moved to withdraw its reserves from European banks. Vietnam declared a currency independence review. Even a senator from Brazil proposed, if Burkina Faso can price its gold, why can't we price our rainforest? That's what frightened the empire most. Not a tank, not a vote, but a question: what if we all start valuing ourselves before they do it for us? Taovi, standing before the African Union on the one-year anniversary of Ajax, delivered a final message. He spoke not as a soldier, nor a politician, but as a son of the soil. They mined our land, then they mined our mind, and when that failed, they tried to mine our memory. But today, we remember, we are the value, we are the vault, and we are not for sale. Silence. Then, thunderous applause from presidents, peasants, and every soul in between. The camera zoomed in one last time, not on flags, not on gold, but on a child holding a sign written in trembling charcoal. If we define it, they can't steal it. And for the first time in modern history, the world listened.